Oh, I feel like I've screwed something up. It's just that's the kind of attitude you have, right? But hello, everyone. Today, all going well. This is our first ever stream. Oh, yeah, it works. Okay, good. So this is our first ever response to. No, let's try it again. Well, it is actually our first ever response to Aaron Ra. Aaron Ra is was a atheist guy. I don't know if he still does stuff, but he was a big deal back then. It was kind of a big deal, as they say. And But the other significant thing is this is, I believe, the first time I'm actually managing to do the thing that I've been saying that I've been going to do for about a billion years now, about, I don't know, like over a month, which is recording or streaming twice in 1 week. It's just one of the things. And ordinarily, I should be doing it on Saturday, but I have a church thing tomorrow, Bible club, Bible study. So I'll be going to that. That happens every month. But yes, that's the situation. Essentially, my plan is when I am busy on Saturdays, I'll do it on Friday. Right. I guess we're just going to kind of jump in. I will say I watched a bit of this, and it is actually a response to a response. And the issue of a response to a response is sometimes, I mean, that means necessarily I'm going to, blast through the person who, I'm not even responding to, the person whose clips are being shown. And then there's also the possibility, you know, like, I don't like, essentially it means that the only real thing I can do is defend the other person's arguments, if you get what I'm saying. Because that's the thing. If someone makes a video where they make a series of claims, obviously I have to respond to the claims that they're making. But if someone makes a video where they're responding to someone else's arguments, I don't have to say anything because maybe their argument's really bad. But with that said, we'll see what ends up happening as we jump into this video. Theism is not rational. I mean, that title, like, you can see why with the title, I was like, yeah, I've got to check this out. I'm just worried it's going to be actually entirely communicated through a response to someone else, where the title isn't actually very indicative of the nature of the video. All right, let's go.
Rational to believe in God. Many people think that faith and reason are opposites, that belief in God and tough-minded logical reasoning are like oil and water. They are wrong. Belief in God is far more rational than atheism.
No, sir, you are wrong. Given that a god is a magical anthropomorphic immortal evidently imagined out of nothing by superstitious primitives who didn't understand any.
Whew, we're starting off strong. Right away, like literally the very first words he says in that little kind of dish gallop is already, if you kind of like a circular argument, right? Because what was his first criticism? He said, given that God is so so it is irrational to believe in God, given that God is magical. Now, what does magical mean? Magical basically means supernatural, beyond the natural world. Like if something happens and it can't be explained by nature, by science, we would say that was a magical thing that happened. Obviously, we don't really use the word magical to describe God, but essentially that's clearly what he means when he's saying magical. The problem is, you'll notice that's a circular argument, right? And of course, as we know, atheism has at its core this circular epistemology where something is incorrect. It just occurred to me. I hope I'm actually using the right microphone. I assume I am. I actually just had that thought. Like, am I actually using the right microphone? I'm not using the right microphone. This changes Okay, that was really loud. Wait. This changes everything. Oh my goodness. Okay. This makes so much more sense. Wait. So, do I have different... Okay, so I've been wondering, I'm feeling like my audio hasn't been that good, and I just explained it now. I've been using the wrong microphone. Oh, what a waste of time. Anyway, so there we go. Sorry, by the way, I probably just blew up everyone's headphones when I suddenly switched, because this microphone... So basically, this fancy-looking microphone, I wasn't using that, so... What a disaster. Anyway, sorry, that completely threw me off. I was just, looking, and I was just, had a thought, and I was like... Because, whatever. I don't really get OBS, but I was like, just have that little moment of doubt. And, yeah, it was enough to throw me over the edge. Anyway, okay, sorry. I hope you agree. A justified distraction for the sake of realizing that I needed to fix the audio significantly. Anyway, sorry. But basically, atheism has this circular epistemology where they say, well, obviously that thing's stupid because it doesn't agree with science. And it doesn't agree with science, therefore it doesn't agree with the natural world. Or that thing's stupid because
we don't, it could be better explained by some kind of natural phenomenon, like someone was just insane, blah blah blah. Of course, what you notice here is that all of this is assuming that the natural world is all that exists. But the problem is that, okay, what would prove that something outside the natural world exists? Well, some kind of supernatural event. But the issue is, for atheism, there's always going to be a non-supernatural explanation, like that someone is insane. And of course, this is what Richard Dawkins has said. But yeah, obviously, in this case, we're not even talking about like a specific event. Rather, Aaron Ra is just saying, well, this thing is irrational to believe because it's magical. So it's essentially the equivalent. He might as well just say theism is irrational because it is theism. Theism is irrational because it isn't atheism. And of course, that's not an argument. Kind of makes me want to actually go back and hear the rest of what he said.
Anthropomorphic immortal, evidently imagined.
Okay, wait.
You are wrong. Given that a god is a magical anthropomorphic.
Okay, magic anthropomorphic. So it's irrational to believe in something that's anthropomorphic. There we go. Well, human beings are anthropomorphic, so a bit confused about that.
Immortal, evidently imagined.
Okay, so immortal. Apparently, it's impossible for something to be immortal. I don't know why. Right? Like, if something, what is his argument for the idea is intrinsically irrational to believe in something immortal? Like, not anyway. And then let's hear.
Imagined out of nothing by superstitious primitives who didn't understand anything in the natural world around them.
Okay, evidently imagined out of nothing. Where's that? Like, what's the? Okay, whatever. You know what? Fine. Okay, it's okay. Not everything he says has to be an argument. Maybe sometimes you can just forgive someone putting the cart before the horse.
It is already irrational to imagine that such a thing actually exists, especially with no reason to believe that and plenty of good reasons not to.
Oh, by the way, I like how he says especially with no good reason to believe that. Implying that even if there was a good reason to believe it, it would still be irrational to believe in it because atheists would just say if something is supernatural, it's automatically irrational because they start with the assumption the natural world is all there is. I don't know what's going on with that image. That doesn't seem relevant to anything. Of course, there's no such thing as a Catholic Christian.
The word rational is defined as something that is agreeable to reason, reasonable, and describes someone having possession of the full faculty of reason, of exercising sound reason, being able to be reasoned with. But belief in God requires faith.
By the way, you'll notice there, like that's kind of so what you had in the background. If you're not if you're not watching, essentially there were some images in the background of like different religious people fighting each other. So there were some Hindus fighting some Sikhs. There was, or apparently it's pronounced Sikhs, but yeah, whatever. I felt like it was good branding that in the UK they tend to be called Sikhs, which sounds a lot better. But yeah, and Muslims fighting other people. Appeal to consequence, right? Like arguing that because an idea causes social violence, therefore it's irrational to believe it. That doesn't make any sense. There's lots of ideas that might cause violence. That doesn't mean they're true. Yeah, this is why we have the concept of an appeal to consequence. Just because, like, even if it was true that religion causes huge amounts of violence, that wouldn't make it an incorrect statement about reality.
According to a consensus of dictionaries, scriptural references, hymns, sermons of theologians past and present, all reveal that faith is an assertion of unreasonable conviction assumed without reason and defended against all reason, meaning...
You know what's really funny about this? I made a video on my other channel where I said that some Christians define faith that way, and I got a whole load of responses saying that in fact no Christian defines faith that way. I mean, perhaps I should have, use these guys, like use this guy's quotes. Although I don't know whether or not these quotes are actually. Let's see. So. Yeah, okay, so faith is the acceptance of the truth of a statement in spite of insufficient evidence. There we go, okay. Whatever. But again, the point is that there are people... So essentially what he's saying here, again, is kind of another, like, circular argument in that what he's... Or I don't know if it's like more of a truism, I suppose, a tautological argument. He's saying that believing something... because when there is no evidence for that thing is irrational. Well, yeah, obviously. But the problem is... There's lots of things that someone can believe without evidence. And whenever they do that, that's irrational. But that doesn't mean that belief itself is irrational. Somebody might believe that they are going to... I'm just going to say this, whatever. Someone might believe that they're going to win in a game of blackjack. And they might believe that because they read their horoscope that morning and it said, oh, you're going to make a whole load of money. That's an irrational belief. But someone else might believe they're going to win a game of blackjack because they are an expert card counter. That's not an irrational belief. That's based on pretty good reasoning, right? So it's possible for something to be believed irrationally, but that doesn't make the belief itself irrational. Likewise, there might be some people... By the way, there are lots of people who believe in certain religious things for reasons I would say are bad. Now, yeah, a lot of those people might even agree with me, but of course, suffice it to say, a lot of those people would be people I would disagree with, and therefore I relish the opportunity to point out how their reasoning is irrational. One of the main arguments Mormons make for their religious belief is that they had a personal experience that told them Mormonism is true, to which I would obviously make the argument, well, what about other people who've had religious experiences that they believe make their religion true? And I've seen debates between Mormons and Christians where, yeah, the Mormons have said, I believe that Mormonism is true because of a personal religious experience, and a Christian has asked them that very question. And that's because, of course, Christianity can be defended for reasons other than personal experience of it being true. So, you have this quite significant distinction between someone can believe something for bad reasons versus does that mean you can only believe that thing for bad reasons? And that's obviously a very different question.
That people of strong faith refuse to reason, reject reason, will not be reasoned with. It is never wise to be completely convinced of anything told by another.
I'm going to just make sure people... so sometimes people don't get notifications for my videos and nobody's here, which is... Well, let's see. Is anyone here? 5 people are watching. Okay, sound off in the comments if you're watching. But yeah, I'll say... Yeah, I apologize for a lot of distraction. It's just, I'm noticing that we usually have a much more active comment section. So... let's see. Yes, apologies everyone. Just I had to deal with the... Yep, hello Hype Man 100. Yes, hope you are enjoying the show. Give everyone a like. Sorry, give the stream a like, everyone, as you pop in. Hello, let's see. Okay.
Without question, without reservation, or without reason, or simply to assume anything without precedent or parallel, especially in the absence of verifiable evidence and despite all the overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
Okay, so you'll notice, by the way, if the Bible had said that Jonah swallowed the whale, I would believe it. You'll notice, by the way, these are quotes from specific people. So this isn't proof. Again, to prove theism is irrational, you would have to be showing that the belief in the existence of God itself is irrational. You can't just show that some theists have said things that you think to be irrational, I guess because they're showing an extreme amount of willingness to accept the biblical account. That's not a sufficient argument for a position. I'll just have some water real quick. I'm really thirsty. Oh, I love water. It's what the lions drink. Anyway, yes. And in the case of this, obviously, people are going to have varying degrees of logic. Obviously here, the quote is, if the Bible had said Jonah swallowed the whale, I would believe it. That's not necessarily a rational thing to believe. Although it's, again, not entirely irrational, because you could argue that God, by being magical, could somehow give, or magical, again, as he said, supernatural, Jonah the ability to swallow a whale. But yes.
That is about as irrational as it is possible to be. In practical application, faith is irrational by definition.
Okay, now the problem with this is that faith being defined as, what did he say? Belief without evidence, in spite of evidence, and against all evidence, I think was his claim. That is irrational by definition. The problem is that is not necessarily the only definition of faith, and if that is the only definition of faith you'll permit, then there are people who believe in Christianity or other theistic beliefs for other reasons, and indeed there are people who believe in lots of other false claims for reasons that could be essentially summarized as faith as you're defining it, and that doesn't necessarily even make those beliefs wrong all the time.
Logic can show that there is a God. If you look at the universe with common sense and an open mind, you'll find that it's full of God's fingerprints.
No, you won't. If you assume your conclusion at the onset and use confirmation bias to keep circling back to your initial assumption, which remains baseless, then you can imagine patterns that are not really there. Statistics show that the more you know, the less you believe. So the more closely you look...
Okay, so that's kind of an appeal to authority, and also a bit of a circular argument, isn't it? Because he's saying, like, the more you know, the less you believe. I mean, first of all, knowledge is defined as a type of belief, but I guess he's saying the less you believe in God. Essentially, it seems like what he's probably saying is that more educated people are less likely to believe in God. But again, that doesn't prove that believing in God is not true. It could prove something about our education system. And of course, it's also possible that knowledge in some area might undermine your knowledge in another area. For example, a lot of the scientists of the new atheist movement tend to be very ignorant about philosophy, and gleefully so, like in a way where they don't even, like, essentially willfully ignorant of it as it relates to philosophy.
Look at the universe, the less likely you are to imagine any fingerprints of God. Cosmologists, geologists, and biologists are the scientists most likely to detect these fingerprints if they were actually there. Yet these three fields have the fewest believers and are each overwhelmingly atheist.
Yes, that's because if you are working within a certain field, you do not have to consider the questions of, like, the parameters of that field and, like, how that field came to exist. You don't have to. Essentially, if the more ingrained you are in your presuppositions, the less likely you are to challenge those presuppositions. A presupposition of science is that we can understand the natural world without an appeal to God. And obviously, therefore, the people who are more committed to that are going to say they don't see any reason to believe in it.
Similar trends exist among anthropologists, archaeologists, historians, as well as geneticists, and so on.
This is, okay, whatever. And the other issue here is that we're talking about, like, logic, right? A scientist can tell you all of these pieces of information, but that doesn't mean that they are actually in the best position to ask the question of, well, how did we have all of these things in the natural world in the first place? They're not in the best position to be asking that question, because that's a question that requires logic as it relates to slightly more abstract thinking. Because you've got to think, well, because again, science is the study of the natural world. They're not necessarily the most equipped to consider the question of how did the natural world come into existence in the first place. The same way that a police officer, while they study crime, is not going to necessarily be an expert in the philosophy of ethics. I wouldn't turn to a crime scene investigator to discover, whether or not, deontology or virtue ethics is morally the correct position, because who's to say they'll know that?
Who are increasingly unable to pretend there was ever a God there. Now, why is that? Because if your mind has not been closed by faith and is therefore still capable of thinking rationally, then you should have common sense enough to realize that the whole of humanity is only capable of surviving on a portion of the surface of one tiny pebble of rock and metal out of an immeasurable cosmos, inaccessible to us, inhospitable to us, and clearly not manufactured for us or with us in mind. The very idea that the incomprehensible expanse of the cosmos was conjured by the equivalent of a genie for the purposes of humanity is a delusion of one who literally cannot see the big picture and will not acknowledge evident truths they cannot accept.
Okay, so the giant issue with this is that for a god who is outside of space and time, creating huge, obscene amounts of space and time would be a trivially easy thing to do. So actually, having a giant, massive universe that's existed for billions of years, where we just exist in one tiny, tiny part of it for a very short amount of time, would be exactly what you'd expect if there was a massive, like a god who is well beyond, he is clouded by materialism. Yeah, I mean, this guy, this is a very old video. It's from the early, like basically the cringe era of atheist YouTube. And like, to be fair, I don't think people are making videos like this anymore. I don't even know if this guy is still making videos like this. This is like a real throwback to kind of the days of The Amazing Atheist. I should do responses to The Amazing Atheist. Wouldn't that be crazy? Like, he's still, like, he doesn't even call himself that anymore. Sorry, I got distracted. But yeah, you'll see how, a god who is just totally in command of space and time to the point it's nothing to him, but created us because we are special. He would perhaps quite logically create a universe where we're a tiny little portion of it, but we can see this massive world beyond us. And of course, the interesting thing there is that it actually does give us a good reason to believe in God, which is the Fermi paradox. So essentially, the Fermi paradox, I've spoken about it before, but it basically points out three things which don't really make sense. The first is that clearly life is possible in the universe. We know that because we exist. And the next position, therefore, would be, well, if life is possible in one place, you would expect it to be possible in lots of other places. Because obviously it wouldn't, there's no, like, it would seem weird that there's only one place where life is possible, if it's possible at all. You'd be like, well, what are the odds that, like, it's kind of like, if I flipped a coin, or let's say a dice. A dice works because you can have trick dice. Let's say I threw a dice, and I threw it trillions of times, and every single time I threw the dice, I rolled a 6, and then after a trillion times, I roll a 1. What you would then say is, well, okay, that suggests that this is maybe a trick dice, but it has a slight flaw. Meaning, every now and then something will just go wrong, as in a trillion nows and then, something will go wrong, causing it to not roll a 6. And therefore, if we roll it several more trillion times, we will probably get other instances where it doesn't roll a 6. And then someone says, no, actually, I think it did it at one time, but now it will always roll a 6 no matter what. Like, that doesn't really make any sense to say, like, even if something is very unlikely, it seems hard to imagine that when we're dealing with massive numbers, we would happen to stop at exactly the point where it's only happened one time. Hello, Mr. Headliner. That's okay. You can just go back and watch a double speed. I don't know. It's up to you what you want to do. Anyway, so that's the point. We would expect that there are at least other parts of the universe where life is possible. Then this leads to the other issue, which is that we as human beings have developed technologically very quickly. Like, since we've had intelligent life, we're going to space in less than a million. Like, however you define when human beings came into existence, it's not been a million years, and we've already gone into space. And again, the universe is billions of years. So you have this issue that you would expect that there has existed some other intelligent civilization, because again, it would be weird for it to just be us. And then you have the fact that you would expect one of those civilizations to have appeared before us. But then you have the problem of, well, why haven't they already developed interstellar travel such that we would have encountered them? And that's basically the question of the Fermi paradox, pretty simply explained. And it's an issue. But of course, the obvious solution might be, well, what if Earth is special? What if humanity is special? Everything suggests, actually, that humanity is special. When we're surrounded by billions, if not trillions, of other planets that are uninhabitable, seemingly. Certainly, no other planet that we're aware of, and we've been blasting out all sorts of radio signals. Like, there are trillions of planets who should have been aware of us, considering, like, the radio signals we're blasting out to say, hey, we're here, blah, blah, blah. And yet, we've heard nothing. This is all not what you'd expect, unless, of course, human beings are special. Let's see. If an alien species were found, do you think they would have their own version of Jesus similar to ours? I think if an alien species was found, that would actually create a bit of a problem for theism. Yes, now if they did believe in Jesus, that would be very strong as confirmation of Christianity being true if they had a similar system. Although I'm sure atheists would just say, because again of their circular epistemology, they would say, or unfalsifiable epistemology, well, because there is a potential natural explanation for that, like that civilizations just tend to come up with the same ideas because of, like, whatever, like that's just a certain tendency civilizations will have. That's a possibility, but having said that, if of course they did not seem to believe in Jesus, that would be a problem.
A good place to start is with an argument by Thomas Aquinas, the great 13th century philosopher and theologian. The argument starts with the not very startling observation that things move. But nothing moves for no reason. Something must cause that movement. And whatever caused that must be caused by something else.
Richard, you're saying only a handful of stars even see the light from the Earth that shows human civilization. That seems strange to me, because I'm pretty sure that human beings, with our telescopes and stuff, have taken like pretty detailed pictures of stuff from light years away. It seems hard for me to imagine that if there was like a civilization within, let's say, the observable universe, which is still many, I don't know how many planets are in the observable universe, considering that we can observe their existence in the universe. If we're talking about civilization that's existed for millions of years, which is what we're talking about here, it seems very unlikely that they would not know enough about the observable universe to know it exists. How many planets in observable universe? Let's see. 700 quintillion. So yeah, there should be, unless life on Earth is especially incredible, there should be many civilizations in those 700 quintillion planets. If the odds of intelligent life developing is less than 700 is 1 in, rather, 700 quintillion, that suggests that life is pretty miraculous.
And so on. But this causal chain cannot go backwards forever.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, okay, that light left the stars millions of years ago. So yeah, you're saying they would not be able to see us because our civilization only developed recently. Yes, that is a reasonable point, but nonetheless, it doesn't get to the fact that you would expect that civilizations would that are millions of years old, intelligent civilizations that are millions of years old, would be on the lookout for habitable planets. As far as we can tell, Earth really stands out as being a very habitable planet, so it seems strange that nobody would have ever come and visit us with their advanced travel systems you'd think they'd have developed.
It must have a beginning. There must be an unmoved mover to begin all the motion in the universe, a first domino to start the whole chain moving, since mere matter never moves itself. A modern objection to this argument is that some movements in quantum mechanics, radioactive decay, for example, have no discernible cause. But hang on a second. Just because scientists don't see a cause doesn't mean there isn't one.
Richard says, Christian here, by the way, I agree with you that humans and Earth are special, just don't think the Fermi paradox is that convincing. So I should clarify myself. for me, the Fermi paradox is not like, it wouldn't even make it into a list of my top 5 arguments, but I think it is. I think the Fermi paradox, in my view, is it's quite a strong argument, I think, for the fact that I think it is quite a strong argument for the fact Earth is special, but I'm not saying there are no objections to it, and it's not really the main argument I'd make. I'd say, by the way, and the reason why I thought it was especially worth pausing for that, is that I don't think the prime mover argument is particularly convincing. The main reason why is the prime mover argument, I think, is pretty much handily dealt with by conservation of energy, right? So, for those who aren't aware, the prime mover argument is not the first cause argument. A lot of people get confused about this, so here is your little public service announcement. The prime mover argument is essentially arguing what causes the motion in the universe, not what was the first cause of the motion in the universe. It's saying, what was the thing? Like, when I move right now, where is the energy for that movement coming from? And Aquinas's prime mover argument was essentially saying that there has to be something that is introducing the energy, the movement, whenever something moves. The problem with that argument, of course, is that we now know that there is this elaborate system where movement is constantly cycling around. So while we could still ask the question, and this is a valid question, it's a very good question, this actually would be one of my top 5 arguments for believing in God, the cosmological argument, how did this energy get created in the first place? That's an important question. The prime mover argument, which argues now this energy does exist, how does it continue to be in motion? I don't think that's especially convincing, because, like I say, it's cycling anyway. And this does, to me, this feels a bit like a God of the gaps argument from ignorance, where people would look at the wind and they'd say, well, what's causing the wind to move around? It's like, well, now we know that essentially it's the motions of the earth, and it's, obviously, like, basically we know that energy is just in a cycle and new energy isn't being created. So if there was new energy being created, it would make sense to argue, or to ask rather, how is that new energy being created, and to posit God as some kind of solution to that. But since we know new energy isn't being created, I don't think it's a particularly good argument.
It just means science hasn't found it yet. Maybe someday they will. But then there will have to be a new cause to explain that one, and so on and so on. But science will never find the first cause.
Okay, so I think this guy has actually made the mistake himself of conflating the prime mover and the first cause argument, even though they are not the same thing. But like I say, the first cause argument, so maybe through this act of confusion, we've arrived at an argument which I think is very credible, which is the first cause argument. People are still talking God of the Gaps. In 2025, we're so cooked. Yeah, like God of the Gaps is a really bad argument. A lot of the time people get confused about God of the Gaps, of course, and people don't realize what God of the Gaps is. So the first cause argument is not God of the Gaps, because the reason why is that what we're saying there is that there are things we can observe about the universe. And because of those things that we can observe and know, the only logical explanation the only conceivable explanation for the origin of the universe is God. That's the argument. And that's different from saying, well, we don't know what this thing is, therefore this thing is God. And that's kind of the problem. So like, essentially for me, the big difference in the way to test, if we're talking about the God of the Gaps, is the argument based in ignorance? Is the argument just about, we don't know? When I make the cosmological argument, I don't say, I don't know what made the universe, therefore God made the universe. Instead, what I say is, actually, I do know what made the universe. God made the universe, because here are all the reasons why God is the only explanation that makes sense. The problem with God of the Gaps is it's a very easy thing to abuse. Like, here's the analogy, right? Let's say there's a murder scene. You've got a guy in custody. He confesses to the murder. You find his DNA, his handprints all over the murder weapon, his DNA at the murder scene. You find a written confession from him beforehand saying he plans to do the murder exactly how he plans to do it. You have he has a particular grievance against the victim. You find all this stuff, and it's presented in the courtroom, and the defense attorney says, "Oh, I see. So because you don't know what could explain all of this evidence, you're going to appeal to murder of the gaps and say that it was a murder that did it." No, obviously that's stupid, right? Like, that's the thing. I think a lot of people make that mistake, though, right? Of thinking that because, oftentimes it's reasonable to say, I don't know what explains all this stuff, therefore it's this thing. If what you're actually saying is all of this stuff points to this conclusion, and therefore I don't know what else you could be saying caused it. All of this evidence points to this guy being the murderer, therefore I don't know what alternative explanation you could possibly have. That's not a God of the gaps or murder of the gaps argument.
That's no knock on science. It simply means that a first cause lies outside the realm of science. Another way to explain this argument is...
just for I'll make the cosmological argument very simply. So for me, the cosmological argument, it's almost a truism, right? It's almost obviously true in that you would say that the natural material world is causal, and therefore there must have been a cause for the natural material world. But that cause can't be part of the natural material world, because then it wouldn't be a cause for the natural material world, because it would be part of it, right? Just makes sense. So it would have to be something beyond the natural material world, which is to say it would have to be something supernatural. Now, the next few steps, you would then say, all right, so something beyond the natural world, something supernatural. Well, we know that part of the natural world, definitionally, is that it has space and time in it. So, okay, we're talking about something supernatural that created the natural world. All right, it's something outside of space and time. And also, of course, this solves the problem of people asking, well, what created that thing? Well, if it exists outside of space and time, it doesn't need something to create it, because if it exists outside of time, we can just say it existed forever. The problem with saying that the natural world existed forever is that you would then be arguing that there was an infinite number of past events. And that doesn't make any sense. Because if I said, before I said the sentence right now, an infinite number of things happened first, that doesn't make sense. Because that would make what I'm saying right now the infinity and first thing, right? There's no such thing as infinity and one. So... yeah, obviously, that's the issue. And then the next thing we say is, okay, well, what can we conceive of that exists outside of space and time? And really, there's not much, right? Because most things, when you actually try conceive of a thing, I'm almost guaranteeing that when you try and conceive of a thing, you imagine some kind of physicality to it. And there's only really one thing I think that we can actually, if we're being honest with ourselves, conceive of as existing outside of space and time. And that is a consciousness, right? I can imagine a consciousness existing outside of space and time, which is to say meaningfully existing. But everything else that I can imagine existing outside of space and time would be abstract concepts like maths, truth, logic, stuff like that. The problem is, yes, in some sense that exists outside of space and time. It doesn't exist in the sense of being an actual thing that exists. It's just an abstraction. The only thing I can think of that could possibly exist independent of a... materiality is a conscious mind. I was speaking to someone recently. They were in my Discord and they were like, I could say that a pink invisible elephant created the universe. And I said, well, the problem with that is that if it created the universe, you're saying that it created space and time, meaning it can't be part of space and time, therefore it can't be part of materiality. So how are you defining it as pink? How are you defining it as an elephant if it doesn't have the form of an elephant, if it doesn't have the color of pink, if it doesn't have these physical attributes? How are you defining it? And the problem, and then that person would have to say, okay, well, fair enough. Okay, it doesn't have the form of an elephant. It doesn't have it isn't pink because you can't say it. So then you just like, okay, so it doesn't have the form of an elephant. It's not pink. So I guess the only thing it could really have then is the mind of an elephant. But then, obviously, how are you defining it as the mind of an elephant? You can't really say it's the mind of an elephant, because what about it makes it an elephanty mind, right? It's just a mind. It's a mind that, by the way, exists prior to elephants, because it's the creator of elephants. You'll notice that actually they just end up arriving back at God. You just end up arriving at some kind of conscious mind that created the universe. So, yeah, essentially that is the cosmological argument.
that everything that begins must have a cause. Nothing can come from nothing.
I have a friend who is considered far more of an expert on this than you ever will be, and he
appeal to authority.
He disagrees with you. But considering your understanding of nothing, then I don't believe that anything came from nothing either. That's one of many reasons why your argument fails. But you do believe...
Wait, what do you mean? Nothing? Okay, let me hear this.
Believe that. You believe that your God created everything out of nothing. Creation ex nihilo. That he spoke everything into existence with an incantation spell. There was no...
Okay, the issue with this is that nothing... he created something physical out of where there was once nothing physical, but he didn't create... There wasn't nothing because he existed, right? So actually, it's not nothing from something. Oh, sorry, something from nothing. I'm also not sure what on earth he means. Like, he kind of just, like, brushed over saying, like, oh, I don't believe nothing came from nothing. Or, sorry, I don't know why I keep rephrasing. He said he didn't believe something came from nothing. So I'm like, okay, so what do you think then?
Mechanism involved. Your God is supposed to be bigger than big and stronger than strong and infinite in every direction one can exaggerate precisely because it is a creature of the id. You can give him whatever powers you want so that he can do whatever he wants simply by willing things into being, mind over matter. Abracadabra is Aramaic for I create as I speak, and that's what you believe. You actually believe in pure freaking magic.
Okay, that's not an argument though. Because magic, defined as something happening supernatural, is by definition the only thing that could have created the natural world. And the natural world is causal, so something must have created it. So magic seems pretty bloomin' rational to me then. So I don't really know what your argument is.
Taking your point beyond that, the first question I would have to ask is, where did your God come from?
Okay. Don't need an answer to that because God is outside of space and time. Therefore, he could have existed forever because there doesn't have to be an infinite number of past events because if he exists outside of time, then there was no past for him. He's just existed for all eternity. But with the material world, we know that the material world is made up of physical events. Like the material world is kind of intrinsically, that's why we talk about space-time, right? This is the whole thing of relativity. The material world is intrinsically linked to time. Therefore, you can't really, and yeah, obviously, I think people say because of relativity, technically protons exist outside of time because they're moving so fast through space that they're actually, as such, not moving through time. But in some sense, obviously, that's about how they experience it, whatever. The point is that for most things, they move through time, and therefore they must have some number of past events. And therefore, you would be positing, if you're saying that they've existed forever, an infinite number of past events. Thank you.
Answer that question. Man obviously created all his own gods in his own image, and there's plenty of evidence to support that conclusion. But
can you give any evidence for that conclusion?
No, you cannot answer that question. All you can do is make the excuse that God somehow...
Blake says, would it be wrong to say God is the living embodiment of reality itself? That always made sense to me. I think it sounds very kind of new agey, and I also don't really... The problem with that is at that point, as far as the cosmological argument, it doesn't really solve your problem, because if you're saying he's the living embodiment of reality itself, it seems like you'd have to be suggesting that he emerged from reality, or that his existence is in some way contingent on reality. I don't know if that's how you would phrase it. Maybe you wouldn't. But my immediate reading there is it makes it sound like you're saying that God is in some way inextricably linked to the material world, and all of reality, including the material world. And obviously that's a problem because then you still have the invocation of a eternally existing material world.
Exists beyond time and outside of our reality.
Okay, yeah.
Which of course means that he does not exist in reality.
So notice it said outside of our reality. He does exist in reality.
I do not grant your excuse because that's all it is.
No, it's not an excuse. It's a logical extension of the argument. It's kind of like saying, again, to go back to the murder analogy, someone gives a whole lot of evidence this guy's the murderer. Someone says, well, isn't it possible that there is a version of this guy who exists who is not the murderer? And then you'd say, well, no, because by definition, this guy is the fact that this is the guy we brought to trial, this is the guy about whom we found all this evidence, that pretty much necessitates he is the murderer. And you'd say, and then you say, oh, well, that's just an excuse that you're saying he necessarily is. No, the point is that the reason why we would say that God exists outside of space and time and therefore doesn't need a creation is not as an excuse, but rather because we arrived at the conclusion that God exists by considering what is the only possible explanation for the existence of the universe. And obviously, and this is pretty basic, the explanation you reach for a inquiry is going to be something that conveniently explains everything that you are trying to explain, because that's how rational inquiry works. It's not a coincidence that everything that evolutionary biologists talk about with reference to evolution conveniently explains everything in the natural world. No, the point is that actually, by the way, if they found some area where evolution didn't make sense, they would change their understanding of evolution to try and make it make more sense. That's just how life works.
Apology for an unsupported assertion of a baseless assumption promoted only with the lies of equivocation and dispensable only.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, so I like the way you put it, actually. So Nevroft Avalokitnavara, I don't know if I read your name right. Everyone. Unfortunately, my little image of people in the chat is very small. I'm inclined sometimes to make it bigger, but whatever. Anyway, but I like the way you phrased it. He can't understand that God is the solution to this problem, not a fave character we like and we try to put somewhere behind reality. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of phrasing it. Yeah, he doesn't understand that obviously God is going to conveniently not have any of these problems because we are positing God as the explanation. And as I said, it's not convenient that relativity explains a lot of physics. The point is, relativity was an explanation that was come up with in order to explain all this stuff.
With logical fallacies.
So if there's no first cause, there can't be second causes, or anything at all. In other words, if there's no creator, there can't be a universe.
So in your very limited perspective, the only way that you would allow for the universe to come into being is if it were conjured by the magic of a deity, essentially the same thing as being poofed out of nothing by a genie?
Okay, yeah. What's your alternative explanation? I genuinely want to hear any alternative. By the way, you'll note this is very the argumentation here, I think, is very manipulative, where essentially he's just saying, the amount of time he focuses on, magic, genies, he shows all this footage from Aladdin. Obviously, it could be pointed out that genies basically operate within the physical world, whatever. But the point is, all of this is intended to make this idea sound really crazy and farcical, but he's not actually presented any evidence for it being farcical. He's just saying, well, doesn't this sound like some stupid stuff? No.
A genie who was always there for eternity until he eventually got an idea to create something besides himself. This is what you consider logic.
By the way, so eventually doesn't make sense to describe something existing outside of space and time. Outside of space and time, things don't happen eventually, do they? This is logical.
It's not, of course.
Okay, why
logic
not?
Disagrees with you.
Why does logic disagree?
Apart from the logical fallacy of the circular argument routing...
How's it a circular argument? Wait. Assume your conclusion, affirm your conviction. So yeah, my face was covering the assume your... But yeah, it says assume your conclusion. How's that work? How's this a circular argument? Where is the God exists, therefore God exists? No, actually, we start with the premise the natural world exists. And is that a fair assumption to make? The natural world exists? And then we make observations. We say, oh, the natural world is causal. Then we say, well, could there conceivably be a point where you go back in the natural world and we get to a point where it's not causal, where things just happened out of nothing? It doesn't really make much sense. And yeah, obviously I've already gone through this, right? But that's the thing. This isn't a circular argument. You start with the observation that the natural material world exists. You work backwards. And that's how you end up with the belief that God exists.
Back to the assumed conclusion, your video also shows the God of the gaps argument, where anything that cannot be explained by science can be blamed.
Okay, already addressed this. It's not God of the gaps because you are pointing to things that we know. Nobody's saying we do not know what created the universe, therefore it was God. No, on the contrary, we're saying we actually do know what created the universe, insofar as we're able to make a load of observations about the real world and a load of logical inductions about the implications of that for the earliest state of the world or the universe, and that's how we come to the conclusion God exists. This is not a God of the gaps, it's the opposite.
On magic. Gods and magic are the most infantile excuses men have ever made up to explain the things they did not understand. Why should we imagine that any first cause should also have a personality, intelligence, or purposeful intent?
Yeah, okay, so this is, like I said, a mind makes sense in the, I already kind of went through this, if you try and actually think through what could exist. And I don't mean just an idea an abstraction we conceive of existing. I mean something that undeniably actually exists outside of space and time. I don't think there is anything you can come up with conceivably apart from a mind. Now, you could argue, well, does that mind need a personality? Will all that kind of stuff? No, not necessarily. But that's when you kind of get into other arguments for the existence of, or other arguments for the validity of a specific religion. For example, the resurrection account of Jesus Christ, attested to by 4 separate authors, all at least arguably written within lifetimes of the eyewitnesses, and I believe even by kind of secular critical datings, not being dated to more than 100 years after his life, and then by contrast historians are happy to use accounts of the Punic Wars, for example. Some of their most authoritative accounts are 200 years after the fact. So, for Gospels worst case scenario written within 100 years, possibly written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, and Paul, who gave the first kind of account of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that was just written within a few decades. The only argument people have against that is saying, well, it's a supernatural claim, therefore we should believe it didn't happen. The problem with that is, if we've now shown that there does exist some kind of mind outside of space and time, actually, that gets over the major hurdle of taking the resurrection account seriously. So maybe we should take the resurrection account seriously. Like that's the kind of thing. And this is the issue with like arguing with atheists, is that they will constantly like bounce back and forth between you don't have a reason to believe that God is like this that God is this like mental personal force, and then they'll say you don't have a reason to believe this particular religion because of the fact that it involves all these supernatural claims. Whereas, of course, in reality, those two things are they kind of reinforce each other in a way where there are arguments for both of them, but they also help each other out. So there are a whole load of reasons to believe in Christianity in terms of the historical accuracy of the text, and obviously, the fact that people used to think the Hittites weren't even a thing. People did not take the Bible seriously as a historical document, and yet the more archaeology we've done, with the exception of Exodus, yes, but notwithstanding, people used to reject a whole lot more of the Bible until we did loads of archaeology. We found out way more of it was accurate than we thought, with the fact that the resurrection account, if judged by the standards by which we typically judge history, that would be considered a well documented thing. But then, okay, so these are all reasons maybe take Christianity seriously, but then say, well, the problem with Christianity is it has this huge hurdle of you've got to accept that there exists a God, and I don't believe in God, I don't find it very credible, therefore I'm not convinced by it. Okay, fair enough. So then let's talk about the idea of why we might say God exists. But then you say, well, the problem with that is, why should we believe this God has a personality, blah, blah, blah. Well, then we can say, hold on, so you've already kind of accepted that there is like some reason to think there is something supernatural here, because now you've just resorted to the objection of, oh, we don't know if this thing had a personality or all that. And you've already kind of accepted that there is some reasons to believe in Christianity, because you've said, well, the only real issue you have with it is supernatural claims. But if we combine these two things together, suddenly we've got a pretty credible worldview, right? Because the supernatural aspect of this perfectly accounts for your issue with the why you might be inclined to reject Christianity, and the personal vision of God presented in Christianity perfectly accounts for why we should believe there is a personality. That's my take. Notice that he quickly moved away from the simple ontological question to another one, i.e. the personal God, the specific God of Christianity. Yes, that's a good point, yes, and you're absolutely right to point out. Well done.
Why do people imagine that everything beyond us should think or behave like us? This is one way humans have always been confused by their deceptive imaginations. Once upon a time, our ancestors believed that thunder, lightning, and volcanoes were gods in action, that comets were an omen, that the stars and planets had human characteristics of thought and mood, that sickness was a result of witchcraft, and that epilepsy was a result of demonic possession. In each case, the real truth might never have been discovered had we been satisfied by these lies, and in each case, the reality was a revelation of whole new fields of study previously unimagined.
The difference here is for all of these things, I think there is some conceivable explanation apart from invoking the divine, right? Like somebody could say, and it might have sounded crazy, but maybe someone wouldn't have come up with the idea themselves, but if someone was trying to work out why do people get sick, and someone said, what if there are little tiny organisms that live in your mucus, and when you cough and stuff, they land on people, and that's what gets them sick because they do bad things inside their body, which is basically germ theory. People would have probably thought that sounded absolutely insane, but the point is that is conceivable. It's conceivable that there are little tiny creatures that cause damage in your body by getting inside you, and as it happens, that's actually what's true. And for all of these things, somebody could say, well, what if with regards to lightning, someone could say, well, what if there's particles in the sky that are in the clouds and stuff, and they kind of rub. I actually don't know if this is how lightning happens, but I believe it is. They kind of rub against each other, and that creates energy, and then that energy has to be released. Pardon me while I just whack myself in the glasses. Has to be released through an electric current. Again, I don't know if that's exactly how thunder forms, or rather lightning forms. But the point is that there are people could come up with conceivable explanations for this apart from God. So all you would have to do is come up with an alternative explanation for a conceivable explanation for how the material world itself could have been created. But the problem is you kind of get back down to that joke of to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first create the universe. Any other explanation relies on taking for granted the universe already exists. So the problem is you don't have that option with the creation of the universe itself.
And vastly more complex than the simple excuses made up in our ignorance. No doubt that pattern will continue, such that if we ever do discover the cause of the Big Bang, it too will be so complex and such a vast wealth of knowledge that it will render our previous belief in gods just as laughably silly as every other field of study so far has already done.
Again, you are purely taking it on faith that we might or could even come up with that solution when you haven't even come up with a conceivable explanation. And the problem, I want to stress this, the problem with not bothering to come up with conceivable alternative explanations is it means you can deny anything. Again, going back to the murderer example, if you are content to just let someone off for murder because even though you cannot come up with any conceivable explanation for how all of this evidence could point to this guy being the murderer, you are just going to say, well, but I still don't believe it. That's a problem. You could, based on this, as a young Earth creationist, reject evolution, because even if they found every single organism of the fossil record showing exactly the transition, they just find at some cliff somewhere just says, oh wow, it's every single one of from one species to another or whatever. Well, obviously we do know that speciation is the thing, but from one kind to another, from one family to another, from the common ancestor of all mammals to all the various different mammals, somebody could still, based on atheist logic, continue to reject evolution, because they could say, well, even though I cannot come up with a conceivable explanation for how on earth we could have this total fossil record of really clear slow changes from one animal to another, one different type of animal to another, I'm still going to reject it, right? Because maybe we'll come up with some other explanation. That's the issue. I would personally say that when you cannot conceive of an alternative explanation, you kind of have an intellectual responsibility to say that the one thing we can conceive of is the most credible, and what we should kind of take for granted is true.
One thing I need to do is pass my driving.
But what if the universe were infinitely old, you might ask? Well, all scientists today agree that the universe is not infinitely old, that it had a beginning in the Big Bang.
I think that's a weak argument, though. The real argument you want to focus on is the fact that, again, if the universe is infinitely old, that requires an infinite number of past events. And again, that means that before I said this sentence right now, an infinite number of things happened first. Although, bearing in mind that what I said a few, at the start of this stream was the infinity and first thing, this might make that that might make what I'm saying now the infinity and a fair bit more thing to have happened. But again, that's the problem with infinity, right? Because really, no matter how many billions of years into the future, it's still going to be the infinity of thing to have happened. Because infinity isn't actually a number, which is kind of the problem with saying that an infinity number of things have happened.
Wherein the origin of space itself is also connected to time. Some cosmologists chose to illustrate the beginning of time as an asymptote on our Cartesian coordinates.
Sorry, this is going to make me sound incredibly stupid. What does JWST stand for? I feel like I should know, but I can't think right now.
System. As we scan back...
Hello, by the way, tooling around. Good to have you here. And everyone watching, it seems like the chat's a bit more active, which of course I'm very appreciative of. Please give the video a like and help it out.
Backward, time slows down as we plunge into the Big Bang until 1 second equals infinity when t equals...
Oh, James Webb Space Telescope. Okay, I didn't actually know that.
0. That means that while the Big Bang is still a beginning, it also simultaneously is eternal and therefore infinitely old.
Wait, hold on. I kind of missed
what the universe had a beginning.
Big and equals, as we cosmologists chose to illustrate the beginning of time as an asymptote on our Cartesian coordinate system. As we scan backward, time slows down as we plunge into the Big Bang until 1 second equals infinity when t equals 0. That means that...
The problem with saying 1 second equals infinity is that means that you're saying, again, infinity happened and then the universe. But again, that still runs into the issue of, okay, so infinity has happened first, right?
While the Big Bang is still a beginning, it also simultaneously is eternal and therefore infinitely old.
If the universe had a beginning, then it didn't have to exist. And things which don't have to exist must have a cause. There's confirmation of this argument from Big Bang cosmology.
I've never really understood the argument from contingency, where you say something that didn't have to exist must have a cause.
Then again, I have to ask, where did your God come from? Because God doesn't have to exist, no matter how you're attached to that emotional crutch or how desperately you need to maintain that belief. Nothing has to exist unless it serves a purpose. The only purpose God serves is to give people an excuse, not just for what they don't understand, but any excuse they need. They don't have to face their own death because they'll just pretend that it's not really real and that they'll live on forever afterwards, happy and comfortable all the time. Unbelievable. They can use their God to rationalize or justify anything and escape accountability too. You don't have to actually help anyone. You can just wish upon a star that they'll get the help that they need. You don't have to be a...
Yeah, so this is nobody I'm aware of. I've never met a religious person who actually thinks that. Indeed, obviously it's been shown that Christians are far more charitable than atheists. The reality is that, and even in the Bible and stuff, I'm not even aware of any religious text where the people who we're supposed to kind of look toward as religious examples stop short of actually helping people physically to instead just pray for them. No, on the contrary, Jesus is constantly helping people physically. So no, you're wrong. This is just not a thing people do.
Accountable to anyone or be responsible for your actions. You can live like there's no tomorrow because God will come and destroy the world soon anyway, and you can just assume that he's already forgiven you for whatever you should have atoned for, and you can justify all other atrocities simply by...
By the way, most religious people do not believe that. So I actually do believe that I can live like the devil and still go to heaven because God's already forgiven me for past, future, and present sin. The issue is that most, even nominal Christians, think that that's wrong. They don't like that. They don't like the idea that they've done nothing to earn their salvation. Actually, most religious people want to believe that they've done some good works, or they have to do some good works, either to prove that they have true saving faith, or, for most religions, to prove that they actually are worthy enough to enter heaven. So, yeah, that's the issue number one. We've even suggesting the reason people become religious is so that they can believe that God's already forgiven them for all of their sins, and therefore they don't even have to do any atonement. That's actually not how most people experience religion. And of course, the people who do believe that, like myself, actually tends to be, I'm not going to say more proactive about helping people, but certainly more proactive about doing things for that religion. There's lots of people I know who believe in, who make some effort to insert work salvation into the gospel. I'm someone who literally believes that I could be doing absolutely nothing, but instead I'm doing these live streams, which I think are of at least some value. And yeah, I just think that speaks to something.
By thinking that God hates all the same things that you do. But if you are accountable and responsible, and you want to understand the way things really are...
By the way, it's completely irrational to think God hates all the same things we do, because the Bible commands us to love our enemies, but David says in the Psalms, I hope I'm right about that, he says, "Do I not hate your enemies, O Lord?" Now, I stop myself short there because I do want to stress, of course, we don't always know that just because something is communicated by someone in the Bible, that means it's the correct thing. But to me, I think that speaks to the fact that actually there is a distinct difference between our enemies, who I believe we should love unconditionally, and God's enemies, where while I wouldn't necessarily say we should hate them, I do think that there isn't that same expectation of loving them unconditionally. Because again, your enemy is just someone who's wronged you, but God's enemy is someone who has wronged him, and not only that, but is committed to even rejecting the gospel by which they could be saved. Because obviously we've all wronged God, but there's a difference between someone who I would say becomes an enemy of God because they have actively rejected him at every turn, versus someone who maybe they reject him today, but there's still a chance for them to be saved tomorrow. But yeah, I would say actually that I think it makes sense to read the Bible. Personally, I feel like it makes sense to read the Bible with a mind towards the fact that our enemies and God's enemies are different categorizations, and we don't want to make that mistake. And indeed, there might be people who we quite like, but actually, perhaps they're God's enemy because they are reprobate in some way or other.
Then God doesn't have to exist, and there's really no way he could. The universe...
Yeah, and for the record, if it seems like I'm not really responding to this, first of all, it's because I actually do want to get through this whole video. We don't have an infinite amount of time anymore, although, again, I guess we do have an infinite amount of time because apparently infinity can happen and then afterwards. So just like infinity happened and then the universe was created, maybe infinity can happen and then I'll end this live stream. And somehow that will result in me actually ending the live stream at some point. But yeah, obviously, like I say, I don't find this argument... to me, it doesn't make sense. I don't want to... I don't want to knock philosophy. Obviously, there's things that I just don't know because... I don't know, and I don't want to knock that which I'm not familiar with. The contingency argument seems to be a very philosophically grounded one, but one which I just personally don't understand.
Only comes into focus once you put down the God glasses.
We now know that...
Oh, by the way, tooling around, like, that is interesting about how we don't even know about the age of the universe. It's at least twice as old as we thought. That's curious.
All matter, that is, the whole universe, came into existence some 13.7 billion years ago. And
more like 27.4 billion years ago.
It's been expanding and cooling ever since. No scientist doubts that anymore, even though, before it was scientifically proved, atheists called it creationism in disguise. Now, add to this premise a very logical second premise, the principle of causality, that nothing begins without an adequate cause. And you get the conclusion that since there was a Big Bang, there must be a Big Banger. But is this Big Banger God? Why couldn't it be just another universe? Because Einstein's general theory of relativity says that all time is relative to matter. And since all matter began 13.7 billion years ago, so did all time. So there's no time before the Big Bang.
The issue here isn't about time. Matter and energy are interchangeable and could be eternal. Cosmic inflation from a quantum singularity could be explained as three-dimensional space-time emerging from a fourth spatial dimension, which could have entirely natural catalysts and still wouldn't have anything coming from nothing.
Okay, so there's two things there which need to be addressed. One, he seems to be saying the issue isn't about time. I don't know why he's concluded the issue isn't about time. The issue is about time, because if you have time, then you kind of have causality. Again, it comes back to the thing I've already said. You can't have an infinite number of past events. So time's actually a big issue. The second thing he said is, it could be from higher dimensions. Here's the problem, and this is like something you get all the time. Like, I had this, one of the first arguments I had on this channel in one of my very early live streams. This guy came along, and essentially I presented the same argument with regards to cosmological, and I said, is there any conceivable alternative to a supernatural mind that you can present? And they gish-galloped a whole load of different things, but the problem is every single thing they presented was either some variant of well, actually, I was going to say either or, but to be honest, almost all of it was basically not the creation of the material world, but rather just the creation of our current universe from some pre-existent materials. Like he said, maybe the whole universe was black holes. All right, well, black holes is incredibly dense matter, so you're still invoking the existence of matter. Of course, here, dimensions only make sense in terms of matter. It's possible that maybe our universe did appear from a higher dimension, but the problem is that higher dimension would still be part of the material world. Higher dimensions are still part of space-time, so you haven't solved the problem. You're just explaining how our universe came into existence, but then, how did the material world wherein that higher dimension operates come into existence? Because that's, it's still part of space-time.
Or any another universe either, but rather from a larger plane far beyond any current concept.
Empyrean says the cosmology arguments are very poor from theism, tbh. IDK, why they bother? Well, that's interesting, because I've said that I think it's actually quite a compelling argument, the cosmological argument.
And even if there is time before the Big Bang, even if there is a multiverse, that is, many universes with many Big Bangs, as string theory says is mathematically possible, that too must have a beginning. An absolute beginning is what most people mean by God.
No, it isn't. Apart from a handful of deists and quasi-pantheists like Spinoza and Einstein, who was atheist, what most people mean by God is an intelligent director controlling all things, rewarding good deeds and punishing bad, as if this was an episode.
Again, this guy needs to make the argument. I don't know if I'm actually kind of forgetting whether this guy has actually made the argument or whether it's just been me. But the reason why we can only conceive, what I already said, if we're talking about something outside of space and time, we have to be talking about a mind.
To the Twilight Zone, and God was Rod Serling. Otherwise, what everyone means by God is a conscious thinking mind, in the image of man, behind everything in the universe, and there is just no reason to believe anything like that.
Yet some atheists find the existence of an infinite number of other universes more rational than the existence of a creator. Never mind that there is no empirical evidence at all that any of these unknown universes exists, let alone 1,000 or a gazillion.
A few moments ago, you said that if there was no creator, then there could be no universe. Yet a multiverse as a boiling cauldron of universal Big Bangs is just one of several possibilities which negate your conclusion.
No, because the point is that if anything, magnifies it. Like, you can't explain away the existence of the universe by positing infinite universes. It's turtles all the way down. And yeah, like basically, because then all those universes need explanations too. You're just making the problem worse.
However, God is not possible, because God is defined by his miraculous nature. Miracles share the same definition as...
It's like 20 to 30 years behind current models and understanding. Okay, I mean, look, Empyrean, whatever your name is, if you can say how current models have allowed us to understand how you can have either, because this is what I want, okay, either an explanation for how all of matter can have emerged without a cause, or how matter can have existed for eternity. Like, do current models explain either of those things? Because that's what you would need.
Magic, evoking supernatural forces or entities to control or forecast natural events. But miracles are also defined by being inexplicable by science because they defy the laws of physics, meaning that...
Yeah, of course, which makes sense because the universe, like, the laws of physics are wrapped up with the universe, and therefore the point is you would need a something magical to explain. Like, it's almost like that's the very reason we need something magical as an explanation for the creation of the universe, because the laws of physics themselves dictate that the universe shouldn't exist. So there has to have been something beyond the laws of physics in order to create the universe in the first place. Empyrean says, isn't that an argument from ignorance? No, so you... I guess you've just dropped in, and that's fine. By the way, welcome. Please give the stream a like. But earlier on, I kind of made a bit of a satire of that, where I pointed out that saying that there is no conceivable explanation that is an alternative for the evidence actually is a very rational basis for believing something.
They are physically impossible, and thus God is impossible by definition. God is also not indicated.
What is your name? Nevrotic. There we go. Okay, Nevrotic. This guy is begging the question all the time. He says, "This is magic. Magic is stupid," and walk away with his heart content. Yeah, that's kind of it. Like, his whole argument is just calling the thing magic and then saying, "Well, obviously it's stupid."
Indicated by anything except, of course, for the compiled fables of men. Repugnant atrocities and contradictory absurdities which have all been falsified and which are certainly false. That and all the practices of faith have a perfect rate of absolute failure in all applications. Human vanity, ignorance, fear of the unknown, and fear of knowing.
So there he says, like, it's had a perfect rate of failure. I don't really know what he means there, because it's kind of like, in a way, I feel like that's kind of an irrational thing to say, because all ideas, like, there's no such thing as, like, something being proven true, right? The only thing you can get in science is something being proven false. Like, evolution hasn't been proved true. Gravity hasn't been proved true. The only thing that can actually happen for any scientific idea is that it is proven false. That's like the only... And that's the thing. There's actually like a lot of things in logic where it's kind of like the only point at which you can know for certain is when you know something isn't the case. Because it's much easier to know something isn't the case than to know something is the case. Or let's say something definitely is the case and no other alternative is possible. That's much harder. And that's why, personally, like, I'll say this. It would be difficult for me to come up with something that would absolutely prove God does exist. But it would be slightly easier for me to come up with something that would absolutely prove God doesn't exist. It's generally easier to show that something isn't true because statements make or like any belief carries over a whole load of specific claims. So with that said, saying that, oh, religion has always failed this test. Well, it's like, so arguably, yeah, because there's lots of religions, and therefore there's going to be many, many religions that have been proven false in some kind of sense. But then you've got the problem of, like, he seems to be suggesting, and the issue is we've never had a religion that's been proven true. Yeah, but then we've never had a scientific theory that's been proven true either, have we? So Yeah, it's just it seems to demonstrate a misunderstanding of how empiricism works to say, well, religion keeps failing these tests. It's like, well, most religion, by the way, hasn't failed one way or the other because we don't know yet. Just like with science, most of science hasn't failed one way or the other because we don't know yet. But obviously, the way knowledge works is we knock down the ideas that don't make sense and then see what does make sense.
Are among the last reasons anyone still believes in a God.
The conclusion that God exists doesn't require faith.
You know better than that. Yes, it absolutely does. And as a Christian, you know that it does.
Okay, he hasn't, yeah. It doesn't require faith.
A firm conviction without any evidence is necessary for your belief system. That's why it's praised throughout your doctrine and promoted as the highest priority and an obligate.
Yeah, so this is let's say, equivocation. How about that? Ultimately, faith can mean multiple different things. So, for example, I believe in faith alone. But when this guy's talking about like faith as belief without evidence, I'd be like, well, it doesn't take any faith at all. Obviously, there's faith meaning like trusting in God, and then there's faith, of course, when you trust in God because you have evidence to believe He's true and He'll do what He says.
Requirement of salvation. You know better than that.
I noticed, Imperion, that you have not provided any explanation for how what's it called, standard cosmology has a conceivable explanation for how the universe exists.
Atheism requires faith.
I'm not just an atheist and an anti-theist. I'm an epistivist. That means that I reject faith as being the most dishonest position it is possible to have. It really is inherently dishonest, and you already know that it is. That's why you assert as fact things that are not evidently true. That's why you just told both of the lies you just did, lies of projection and equivocation. I see it from theists all the time, but...
Sorry, okay, so this person says, a lack of conviction does require faith, and that is supposed to be a lie. And I guess his argument here is, like, you couldn't possibly say that a lack of conviction requires faith. But yes, you could say that. Because if there's something that's obviously true, and you're confronted with how true that is, and you say, well, I don't care how obviously true that thing is, I'm going to refuse to believe it, despite all evidence telling me it's true, that requires faith. Like, that requires you to believe something, namely, believe that that thing is not true, despite all the evidence telling you it is.
Understand that you don't have evidence, and we don't have faith. In order to preserve a preferred belief, you're trying to distance yourself from faith and trying to project all your own faults onto those who will not share any of those flaws, misrepresenting our position as a straw man fallacy. I won't let you do that.
It takes faith to believe in everything coming from nothing.
Yet that is what you believe, not me. That's also what Krauss believes, but the way he explains nothing, it doesn't require any faith to understand what he means. So you're deliberately misrepresenting both of our positions.
Sorry, he has not said what he believes. He has not actually explained anything as to how the universe could possibly exist. So, like, yeah, I don't know why he's getting so cocky. And also, he, of course, is wrong to say that this person believes in a universe coming from nothing, because we believe that God pre-exists everything.
It takes only reason to believe in everything coming from God.
And yet there is no reason you can provide why anyone should believe that. It certainly wasn't reason that led you to that conclusion.
What's your argument for that?
If it was, you wouldn't have to lie about it, depending on arguments instead of evidence. We can either base our beliefs on faith in lieu of evidence, or...
Did this guy say depending on arguments instead of evidence? Arguments are how we present evidence. If you present evidence for something, that is an argument. I don't know what he means by argument instead of evidence. That makes no sense.
Or we can base
let's see. Empiron, what specifically about cosmology beginning do you want an explanation of? So I want an explanation of how material came into existence. So prior to when there was material, what happened to make it so there was now material? Like, there was no material. What happened to make it so there is material? That's my question. And then my follow-up question, just in case you're going to say, well, we think that actually material existed forever, would be, how can you have an infinite number of past material events?
Our understanding on evidence. That's what reason is, and you haven't got any.
I'm Peter Kraft, professor of philosophy at Boston College for Prager University.
Okay.
And I'm Aaron Ra, Texas State Director of American Atheists and a free thought contributor to the Global Secular Council. I'm also a professional public speaker like Dr. Kraft, except that he charges $2,000 a day for his speaking gigs, and that's just one of many reasons why I'm much more reasonable.
Yeah. Okay. That's a pretty like petty thing. Like at the end of the day, like people. I mean, that is like a lot of money. Respect. Yeah. By the way, guys, where's the I think you can guys can give donations now, so I expect the $2,000 before this is over. Yeah, obviously that's a like. Well, no, it's not. Whatever. It's fine. You can like say that. It's just that doesn't make his arguments wrong.
Please share this video, and if you'd like to support anything that I'm doing, then pledge $1 per video on my Patreon channel. Activism is typically not for profit, and everything I do is by donation, so thank you for your support.
Right. So, we're kind of ready to end it. I mean, obviously, I realize that there's a bit of a back and forth with Empyrean on whatever, but I may not be able to. You might just have to come back next week, because I don't think I'm gonna stick around just to wait for that to come in. I'll just say thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll aim to see you all just next Monday. So yeah, not too far away. That's what's happening with the benefit of streaming twice in a week. Not too much of a gap. All right. Yeah, thank you everyone. Do remember to give the video a like before you leave, and if you are watching this after the fact, not live, then yeah, still smash that like button, subscribe, and I will see you all